Hey, it's Adrian, and today I'm doing a full review of the S22 Ultra. Now, this is an expensive phone, but is it worth that high price tag? So today I'm going to review it. I'm going to look at the camera performance, battery life, and just overall performance, and you can decide if it's worth spending that type of money. So before I get into the rest of the review, I am coming from a 5-year-old Sony Xperia XZ Premium. It's pretty similar in terms of the boxy, squarish type of look. So keep in mind, this is my first Samsung product, so my review is going to reflect that. Box, you get the phone, USB Type-C charging cable, SIM card eject tool. However, there is no charger included. In the rest of the world, you get the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 CPU, but in Europe, it's the Exynos 2200. The GPU is an Adreno 730. In terms of the screen, you get a 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED screen that runs up to 120 Hz, so it does have a variable refresh rate. It also supports HDR10+, and there's a max brightness of 1750 nits, which is pretty impressive. The max resolution on the phone is 1440 by 3088 pixels, and you have a pixel density of 500. RAM configurations are 8 gigs for the base model, and 12 gigs for every model above that. Storage is UFS 3.1, and you can go from 128 gigs to 1 terabyte. Choose wisely because there is no expandable storage on this phone. You also get the newest Bluetooth spec, so Bluetooth 5.2. There are stereo speakers tuned by AKG. There's NFC, near field communication for tapping to pay. You have 15-watt wireless charging and 4.5 watts reverse wireless charging. There's a 5000 milliamp battery, USB Type-C 3.2, under display fingerprint reader, fast 45-watt charging, and the overall dimensions are 6.43 inches high, 3.07 inches wide, and 0.35 inches in height. Like with most other flagship phones, you have an IP68 dust and water resistant rating. And I'll touch on the cameras when I get to that section. The front and back of the phone are protected in Gorilla Glass Victus Plus, so that's going to help prevent it from any type of accidental drops or occasional scratches. Taking a closer look at the front of the phone, you can see that the glass is mostly flat. However, when you angle it and view it from the side, the glass does curve into that aluminum frame there. Also, there's a 40 megapixel selfie camera cutout right at the top. Bottom of the phone is where you find all the connections. So you have the SIM card tray, microphone, USB Type-C charging port, speakers, and the ejectable S Pen. The phone does accept 2 nano SIM cards if needed. On the right side of the phone, you'll find the volume rocker and power button, which can also be programmed to activate Bixby. Top of the phone has an additional microphone, and on the left side, there are no buttons. Taking a look at the back of the phone, you can see it looks really sharp. So you have the Samsung logo etched into the bottom there. And the really standout feature here is this camera setup. So you can see if I rotate the phone to the side, these camera lenses, they're just protruding. There's no camera bump, no camera module, and it's just a nice, clean look. The other thing that works really well with this is you can see these black rings for each of the camera lens, so it contrasts really well. So I'm going to do my best to show this on video. However, the white at the back, it's not a glossy type of white, it's a matte type of finish, which helps to resist against fingerprints. This phone comes in at around 229 grams, which works out to about half of a pound. So it does have some heft to it, which contributes to the premium feel of the phone. Now, holding it in the hand and using it daily, it's pretty easy to manage, and even though it's such a long phone, it doesn't feel like it's gonna flip over. Taking a look at the camera, so the front camera is a 40 megapixel camera. It's an f2.2 aperture with a 26 millimeter focal length, and it's capable of 4K video at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second and 1080p at 30 frames per second. Looking at the quad camera setup on the back. So the first camera is the 12 megapixel ultra wide with an aperture of f2.2 and a 13 millimeter focal length. So that gives the equivalent of about 120 degrees field of view. Now the second camera is the 108 megapixel main camera. It has a f1.8 aperture, focal length of 23 millimeters, and that does have image stabilization. The next lens is the 10 megapixel optical zoom, which has an aperture of f4.9 and a focal length of 230 millimeters with image stabilization. The last camera is the 10 megapixel with 3x optical zoom. It's an aperture of f2.4 and a 70 millimeter focal length with image stabilization as well. And the last module here is just the laser autofocus. And of course you have the flash. For the video formats, you can shoot 8K at 24 frames a second, 4K at 30 or 60 frames per second, 1080p at 30, 60 or 240 frames per second, and finally 720p at 960 frames per second for super slow-mo. I was really impressed with the camera performance, so I really enjoyed taking photos and videos with the cameras. Indoor and outdoor photos were really quick to focus and take without having to play around with any manual settings, so it was really accurate at just maintaining focus and taking the photo. But there is also a pro mode if you want to set things manually, like ISO, shutter speed, white balance, focus, and so on. Now here's a series of photos I took starting from the ultra wide lens to the main lens, the 3x zoom, 10x zoom, then finally the 30 and 100 times zoom. Now by the time you get into the 30x zoom, the quality is pretty questionable. I would really use that to see something far away, but not really to capture it. At 100x, you're really just reaching, you're using it to see something, but whatever you capture is pretty much not going to be usable for really anything. I really did find myself using the ultra wide quite a lot. On my previous phone, I didn't have that, and I didn't realize how much I prefer ultra wide shots versus just like a regular wide shot or a telephoto shot. The camera does really well with close-up shots too, so you can see as I get close to this watch, it can really pick up the texture and knurling on that dial. If I go to the 1x, you could really see it there. I'll take a photo of that. And if I go to 3x and I back up a bit, again, pretty nice detail there. 10x is a bit more crazy, but let me see how close I can get. And that's really a ton of detail right there. I could see things that I don't even want to see. Now, in addition to just taking like single shots with the camera, you can also take burst photos up to 100 photos. So to do that, you would just swipe on the shutter, and you can see I'll just vary my camera around, and it does max out at 100 images. So if I go into my gallery, you can see there it does show 100 images. If I click on that, these are the series of photos that I took, and I could just like swipe through and then just pick whichever image I think is best in focus and then save that image. Pretty cool feature. A quick demo of the selfie camera in the app. So right now I'm in photo mode. You could see I'm in focus, my background's in focus. If I click on the portrait mode, which activates like the beautify stuff, you can see the background's automatically out of focus. And if I click this little circle here, you could see I could drag down the effect. So the background can be super in focus or completely out of focus. I also have an option to change skin softening. So if I click on this little wand here, there's a skin smoothness slider, and you can see I can slide it till it's like really cartoonish or bring it all the way back. Quick demo. So if you get out of portrait mode and you go into regular photo mode, if you click this little wand here, you can see there's an option that says face that's selected. If I click on the first icon, it's smoothness. So I can drop the smoothness so it's just my actual skin, or I can crank it all the way up. I'll put it like maybe halfway just to show. And there's another option here for jawline. So I can actually drag this slider and slim my jaw, which is pretty neat. But if only it was that easy. There's another option for eyes. So you can see the eyes, it does make them like larger, like anime style, or you could drag it down to reality and then all the way back up again. So I've made it kind of dark in here. I just have a really low ambient light to simulate like a street light. So I'll go ahead and take a photo now. It says to hold the camera still for about 4 seconds. So I'm doing that, and let me just review that. And wow, that's actually pretty well in focus. It even captured the loom. When it comes to video, the quality is just as good. So the image stabilization works great whether you're holding the phone with one hand or two hands while you're walking. 8K video is only at 24 frames a second, and it uses the main camera. There also is no optical zoom. There's only digital zoom, and it doesn't look that great. Stabilization is not as good here, probably because there's no room to crop in. 4K video can be shot at 30 frames or 60 frames a second, and the quality really is great, and it is nicely stabilized. You're able to use any of the focal lengths from the ultra wide all the way up to the 10x optical zoom. However, when I did try the 10x optical zoom, the stabilization was all over the place and really wonky. So I would say stick to 3x optical zoom or the wide or ultra wide, stay away from the 10x if you're going to be walking. 1080p video can be shot at 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, but there is a noticeable quality difference when you go from 4K. However, it is still nicely stabilized. So in addition to the regular photo and video modes, there's also a section here called More, and it has some pretty cool stuff in here. So if you click on Director's View, what that does is it uses both the front selfie camera and the rear camera at the back here. And you can see this could be really handy for doing like a vlog style or a travel type video. So it's really cool, or anything where you're giving commentary. The other thing to notice is if you click on this icon up here, it does a split view, so you can have them both take 50% of the screen, or you can just click back here, so it's kind of like a picture-in-picture mode. Now, when you save the video, you can save both camera feeds at the same time, or you can save it so that each video will be a separate video file in your gallery, and you can then edit that whenever you like in post-processing to, you know, layer this wherever you would like it. So pretty cool and handy feature. There's also a really neat hyperlapse feature, which was a ton of fun to use. And I think you can have a lot of uses for this actually, but here's a quick clip I took to demo it. It's also an option for super slow-mo. And anytime you record something in super slow-mo, it records it at 960 frames a second. However, the video quality is only 720p, the slow motion mode. So this records things at 240 frames per second, and it does record audio at the same time, but the audio is going to be kind of slowed down to match the clip. Pretty cool, but again, the quality isn't the greatest. So with this 5 camera setup, I think you can take on pretty much any situation. You know, you have the ultra wide, say you're gonna capture like an entire room or something like that, and then you have the 10x optical if you really want to punch in. So let's talk about the screen. So it's a 6.8-inch screen, it's an AMOLED, and it is super bright. So I was out in the sunlight, here's a clip of that, and I had no issues reading the screen. One thing I did do is I did go into display options, and there was an option to enable extra brightness, and I did enable that, and it did bump the brightness up a little bit more. So if you're having problems, even though you've maxed the brightness up in here, just go in there, try to find that setting and see if that helps. In terms of resolution, there's 3 resolution options to pick from. You can see I have mine on 3088 by 1440, so I have the highest resolution selected. I found the colors to look really vibrant, the video was sharp, the motion was super fluid thanks to that variable 120 Hz refresh rate, which brings me to that. So even though the variable refresh rate is supposed to go from 1 Hz to 120 Hz, I've only ever seen it go to 24 Hz. Now, while I'm swiping through, you can see it's at 120, but once I stop, it just goes to 24. I've never seen it go lower than 24. If you have on your phone, leave me a comment down below. I'm curious to see what kind of settings you have turned on or what you were doing. Another thing I'm really happy to have back that I missed having is having an always on screen. So you can see I keep mine at maximum brightness all the time just so I could see where the fingerprint sensor is. But there's a quick way to change that at night when you're trying to sleep. If you just double click the clock, you can click this little A icon here, and then you can slide it all the way from the dimmest to the brightest. In terms of overall performance, this phone is no slouch. Like, everything is quick. I have a ton of apps open. It's just really quick to scroll through, providing my internet can keep up, of course, but no complaints. Like, you can have multiple apps open and just running in the background, and then just pick anything and it's ready to go. In terms of gaming performance, I played PUBG, Genshin Impact, and Call of Duty Mobile, and the phone had no problem keeping up. It did get a bit warm while I was playing for extended periods of time, but it was never too hot to hold. And I didn't notice any lag or slowdown even though it was getting warm. So gaming wise, you don't have to really worry. In terms of biometrics and unlocking, I've been using Face Unlock on the fingerprint reader. So the fingerprint reader, it does work. You can see it doesn't take too long. Once I see where I put my finger, I just put it there and it opens. It's good. It's not as fast as on my previous phone where it was side mounted into the power button. I still prefer that side button method, but for now, this will do. In terms of the max volume, I find it to be super adequate. It's really loud. I'll play a quick demo here. Just be careful about your speakers. So here's a quick demo of the fast charge. So right now I have a 45-watt charger plugged into the phone, and you can see I'm averaging around 28 watts. The highest I've seen is around 30. I've not been able to get close to the rated 45 watts of charging. Now, keep in mind, I am using a third-party charger. I wasn't able to get the official Samsung 45-watt charger because it was out of stock. But the third-party charger I am using is a 45-watt charger as well, one of the GAN chargers. And I'm just capping out at around 28, 29, 30 if I'm lucky. Okay, so let's talk about the S Pen. Now, this was not one of the reasons I bought the phone, so I kind of write for myself, but let's see if it recognizes it. So it does have a response time of 2.8 milliseconds, and it does really show when you're using it. So you can see that it did understand what I wrote. I'm sure there's a bunch of different tips when it comes to using this S Pen, but here's one that I've found so far in terms of photo and video. So if I just click it once, it's gonna take a photo. You can see that in the gallery there. And if I hold it down, it's gonna do that burst shot where it takes 100 photos that I showed before. Pretty neat. If you double click that middle button, you can see it's gonna point to the selfie camera up here. And if I double click it again, it's gonna swap and go to the rear camera. So this can be super useful if you have your phone on a tripod or if you're sitting away from your phone. I do wish there was a headphone jack somewhere either on the bottom or on the top. I know a lot of newer flagships, they don't have it. However, Sony still manages to find a way to keep that 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, which is super handy for those of us who still like using wired headphones. The other thing is there's no expandable storage on here, so there's no place to put in a memory card to expand storage. There is wobble when you're using the phone on a flat surface. So you can see if I press here, you can hear that wobble. Now, easily remedied by putting on a case, which I'll show right now. Now, this is a clear case that I bought. It has a bit of a glitter thing that actually looks really nice in the sun. But you can see if I angle it, the camera lenses, there is a bit of a lip there to protect them. As well, you can see all the ports are still at the bottom and accessible except the SIM tray, which is fine because you don't really need access to that all the time. But once I put it down and I'm pressing on the corners, you can see the wobble is much less pronounced, it's not as loud, and it's way more usable. So if you're gonna be getting a case, just make sure you get a case with significant enough of a lip to cover those lenses to minimize wobble. All right, so can I recommend this phone? Initially at the start, it was kind of hard to recommend it at the price, but the more I've used it and the more I've thought about it, if you're gonna keep the phone for a long time, it makes sense. You're getting 4 years of Android updates, 5 years of security patches, meaning that if you can hold on to this phone for 4 or 5 years, the cost of ownership per year is much more reasonable. Like it works out to about say 260, and that's if you get the 12 gig, 256 gigabyte variant of the phone. So if you were to replace this in 2 years or 3 years, whatever your contract length is, then it's an expensive phone. But if you can hold it to 4 or 5 years, then it makes much more sense. So just consider that before you get the phone. All right, so if you've been looking for a new phone or if the design of this phone has caught your eye, I say go for it. I'm coming from a 5-year-old Android phone, and the reason why is, I've been looking, but none of the phones, the designs never really caught my eye. They're all too rounded and kind of boring. So again, this is the 5-year-old phone I'm coming from. It's a Sony Xperia XZ Premium, and it's such a beautiful phone. Like, I secretly do prefer the design of that phone over this, but this is quite similar. It has that squarish type of look. It's not too rounded. I say go for this phone. I haven't encountered any crashes, any bugginess, really anything that would, make me hesitate to recommend it to you. All right, if you have any questions or if there's anything I missed in the review, just leave a question in the comments down below. I do try my best to reply to every comment that I get. If you're interested in learning more about, Android tips or, tips specifically for this phone, please consider liking and subscribing. You can check out my next video here where I have some tips, and I'm always adding to that. See you in the next video.